Right, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar on International Women's Day. Women play a hugely important role in the trademark profession, and with 54% of chartered trademark attorneys being women, 58% of CITMA membership, so that includes students and paralegals. Those are numbers that we can really be proud of. But that doesn't mean that we have gender parity. Women in our profession still encounter obstacles that their male colleagues don't. So joining me today to celebrate the role of women and to challenge the obstacles that women face, I have Kate O'Rourke, Carol Nyasha, and Chris McLeod. Before I pass over to our panel to introduce themselves, a few logistical points. So you should, I'm sure many of you are familiar with the webcam platform, the webinar platform already, but just a reminder. So you should have a panel with a Q&A box, a chat box. If you have any questions for our panel, please put those in the question, type those into the question box, and they will be fed through to me. I will endeavour to either weave those into the conversation or we can turn to them for a Q&A session at the end. Similarly, if you have any technical issues in relation to how the webinar platform works, please also put those into the box and one of the CITMA team will try to help you. So that's it for the technical points. Over to our panel. So Kate, could we start with you? Could you say a few words about who you are? I'm sure most people know you, but who you are and why this issue is important.
Thanks, Richard. Yes, so I'm a past president of CITMA, and as Catherine Wolfe reminded me the other day, in fact, I was the first president of CITMA because people like Chris were presidents of ITMA. But I'm also a partner and the head of the trademarks group at Mewburn Ellis, and I have been in the profession for more than 30 years now. And why this is such an important topic to me is because of my length of service in the profession. When I first started, I was the only woman, only female attorney in the firm. I had no network. I had no idea how I could actually access any career development. There was nothing available to me at that time. Now, things have changed a lot since those years, but there is still so much more to be done. Yes, we do have parity in the profession, but we don't have parity in leadership roles, and that is the critical ambition for me, to see that there are more women in leadership roles in the profession, and how we can actually get there is something that I hope that we will be discussing today. So thank you.
Fantastic, thank you, Kate. Carol, can you introduce yourself and yeah, say why this is important to you?
Sure, I'm Carol Nyasha. I've been in the profession for about 20 years now. I started off my career in the US in-house, and yeah, I moved to the UK in about 2003. Currently a chartered trademark attorney, and this this particular topic that we're going to be talking about today is really quite important to me, because being Black and also a woman and an immigrant as well, I mean, I've faced like quite some barriers and you know, certain situations like over the course of my career, which I'm really hoping that, you know, we can discuss today, and yeah, hopefully help somebody who might be going through the same thing. I mean, I do think as a profession we've come very, very far, particularly in terms of issues of diversity and inclusiveness. But you know, I think there's still work to be done, and hopefully we'll continue to have conversations like this.
Brilliant, thank you, Carol. Yeah, and I look forward to discussing some of those issues shortly. Chris, can you introduce yourselves and say a little bit about why this is important to you, and particularly about the role of men in this area?
Yes, thank you, Richard. As Kate said, I was the last president of ITMA, so a dinosaur in many respects. I'm a partner at Elkington and Fife, and I run the trademark practice out of our London office. It's a small team, 6 people, and 50-50 men and women, but 2 of the women are paralegals. So yeah, my stance on this topic is that from a leadership perspective and someone who's been in the profession for 35 years, the importance to me is that there should be equality. It's an absolute no-brainer, and I think if you look at a company like Coca-Cola, they are very, very overt about this and have said that 30% of the billings that their panel firms can bill them have to be from diverse lawyers, and that obviously includes women. And so to me it's a virtuous circle, because we should inherently be promoting women, but also it will enable firms to develop business if they operate in the correct way. So that's why I'm here.
Thanks very much, Chris. Yeah, absolutely. It is an important issue for everyone across the profession, and yeah, clear business reasons as well, as being the right thing to do. So as a profession, we're able to attract women as trainee market attorneys and trainee paralegals. But as people look up around, as you know, others have touched on, it's not quite as rosy as you look upwards, in terms of senior partners, heads of department, senior paralegals. You know, why is that? Why don't we see the same sort of gender diversity as we go upwards in the profession? So I'll throw that open to the panel. What do you think the issues are that are the obstacles that women are facing in terms of rising up to these senior positions? And have you sort of encountered anything in the course of your careers?
Can I just start, Richard, and say that some of it is structural, of course, in that we are now seeing 50% of women as practicing attorneys, but that wasn't the case 20 years ago, perhaps even 15 years ago. So there is a case to say that even if there are 50% of women coming in now, if that didn't happen 20 years ago, then those people who were entering the profession 20 years ago are not now, the women are not there in leadership positions. So I think it is a timing issue, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't confront it and actually try and expedite some of the progression. But I think we need to accept that there is this issue about timing. So if I think about the stats at my own firm, so we have, in April last year, we were at 59% female, but in our attorneys, but 74% of partners were male. So you can see that gap there. And can I just say, we do publish all this information on our website, which I'm very pleased about. But there is more that I think that we can do as a profession to make sure that women are promoted. And if there's a bit of time later, I would like to talk about the very clear criteria that we have as a firm to explain to people how they can get promoted. So it's not about being tapped on the shoulder. It is about meeting set criteria so that it's all very open and transparent. And I think that type of approach is really, really important.
Thanks, Kate. Yeah, I mean, career progression is clearly one of the key challenges in this area, and those kind of promotion criteria, feed into that strongly. Sort of, Carol, have you got any thoughts about how firms look at career progression and whether there's parity here, or whether there are issues that affect women more than men?
Well, I think actually, if you look at the last year or so, I think there's now a bit more parity, just because I think it's become a little more of a level playing field. I mean, I know certainly for myself personally, I mean, I consider that I was like on an upward trajectory, and then I had children. And I actually then decided to take some time off. I took like a 3-4 year career break, just because I think the demands of what's required to progress and get to the next level, I just couldn't do it with 2 children in tow. But I know certainly now, at least with my own employer, I mean, there's definitely talk of like more flexible work arrangements, and the fact that you take some time off out of work with us, to raise your children for a year or two, and that doesn't really count against you. I mean, I had some quite tense salary negotiations where I was told that, oh, well, you've been out of the profession for a while, so therefore you're not really at the level that you think that you are. We're like, well, actually, nothing much has changed. I mean, the only thing is that I've just been away for a few years, but and I think I said that the only thing that had changed was the fact that CTMs are now called EUTMs, so there wasn't really much of a jump in terms of practice. So I think there has to be like those type of considerations for for women. If you take time off for whatever reason, it might not just be for to look after your children. You might need to be a caregiver, or even just take a sabbatical. That shouldn't count against you in terms of progressing your career.
Yeah, thanks, Carol. That kind of career break, particularly obviously maternity, but just in general, is obviously a key issue, as well as the sort of the societal expectation that women are the primary caregivers. So I don't know if anybody else has got any thoughts around how sort of career breaks, particularly maternity, should be looked at in terms of not just career progression, but also in terms of issues like, is there an issue where people return to work and their clients have been taken away, and then they've got to rebuild their practice up? Those sorts of things. Is this an issue? And if so, how do we best deal with it? What's the best practice for returning to work?
I mean, I'll speak, if I may, in my role as staff partner at ENF, and I think there's a real tension here between continuous client service and client relationship management. So if someone takes 12 months maternity, as is their right, then there has to be some kind of understanding that the firm will continue to manage client relationships, but not to the extent that when the person returns from maternity leave, their clients have all gone to blogs who didn't go on maternity leave. But I think that the last 12 months has led to perhaps a sea change of sorts in some previously fairly retrograde attitudes to presenteeism, and the thought that if you're not in the office Monday to Friday, 8:30 to whenever, then you're not putting it in. And that's why I think that the points that Kate made about transparency and meritocracy are critical. And bluntly, it's no longer relevant whether you're in the office or not. It's what the numbers look like, and that's going to determine your progression. That's how it should have been. But I'm prepared to admit that before the pandemic, I was very much, let's go into the office because I've done it for 34 years. Why don't I just carry on doing that? But I think for us as a firm, certainly the pandemic has shown that it's possible to work from home. It's not necessarily a desirable state of affairs ad infinitum, but I think it has opened some eyes to the alternatives that are out there, and that should perhaps lead to greater flexibility when considering, is someone suitable for partnership, when you combine that with, are they doing well in terms of client development and financial input into the firm. So
something I would add is that we certainly have, during the pandemic, we've seen each other's houses and we've seen each other's families, and it's actually been really interesting to see a number of the male attorneys at my firm with their babies. And I think that maybe the men have got a better understanding now about the demands of childcare. But also, I do think it's going to, we're still a long way off, I believe, but the more men take parental leave, I think the less emphasis there will be on the detriment to be caused by a woman taking maternity leave. So I think that that may have been a benefit of lockdown, but I still think we've got quite a way to go because there is still an unequal playing field. But it has been very, very interesting to see a lot of my male colleagues balancing childcare with attorney responsibilities.
Yeah, certainly chimes with my experience. It has given people a much greater sort of insight into people's home lives and into the challenges of childcare, and just seeing people as people, really, rather than just colleagues and workers. Do you think that the pandemic has had a positive impact in this area? Obviously, there are the issues such as Chris was mentioning in terms of accelerating things in terms of flexible working, breaking down some of the barriers around presenteeism and so on. But it's also had potentially a sort of an uneven impact in terms of things like childcare. So what do you think in terms of the overall, I mean, maybe it's too early to tell, but in terms of the overall impact of the pandemic on gender parity in the trademark profession, what do you think's the overall effect? Is a hard one. I'm not sure I know.
Yeah, I think, as you said, it's like it may be too soon to tell, but I know that there was a poll that was published today because it's International Women's Day, which indicated that certainly women have taken on more in the home, even if their partners were working as well. So that women are doing more of the childcare, they're still doing more of the cleaning. So it is a mixed story, I think, but I think there have been some benefits in relation to home working. So even my firm was a little bit resistant to the whole idea of home working, like Chris, but now there's a greater sense of trust, I think, across the board, that people will just get on with it no matter what level you are in the organization.
Yeah, I think that chimes with my experiences too. I don't know about you, Carol. Has that been your experience?
Yes, I mean, I think, I mean, like I love working from home. I mean, I won't lie about that. It's been really, really great. I get a lot more done, and also I also get time to to pursue like other interests like outside of work. which has been really, really great for my own mental well-being. I think one thing that I have noticed is that working from home, like in terms of client interaction, has really increased the visibility. I don't know if that's the right word for it, but definitely I've had a lot more client interaction, like in terms of like the video calls. Like if a client wants to talk to me, I can just quickly hop on the call. Which I mean, Kate. Let me know if I'm wrong here, but I know that's like a really important thing, like for people who are wanting to progress within their careers, like being able to talk to clients directly and to be able to have those and like more of those interactions.
Yeah, certainly. It'd be interesting to hear, particularly I think from Kate and Chris, around that, the sort of the promotion criteria and the promotion progress, because obviously as firms are looking at those coming up through the ranks and assessing whether people are to become a partner or a senior paralegal or whatever, you're going to be looking at various criteria, and it'd be good to understand how we ensure that those criteria are not disadvantaging women over men. So how do we sort of, well, what are the things that you look for in terms of partnership, and how do we make sure that those are not being felt unequally?
Yeah, I think we touched on this, the points of meritocracy and transparency, and so I think it's easy to be meritocratic and transparent when you're purely looking at someone's financial contribution to the firm, but I think it has to be the case that to progress into the management of a firm, you need to show that you can generate business, and that requires quite a lot of legwork in terms of getting to know a client and their business, and performing to a level where they trust you. I hate the term trusted advisor, but that's what we're aiming for people to get into the partnership. So if someone who's not in the partnership shows that they basically are the point of contact for a particular client, then that's good enough. In addition, if they show that they're going after new business, but I think I would also say, are they a good people person? That's another phrase I hate, so that's two that I've used that I don't like. But are you the kind of person that can walk into a room and start talking to people, or are you a wallflower? And I think there's no reason that a man or a woman should be considered one of those or the other. Where I think the difficulty might arise is if someone is unable to undertake business travel. At the moment, that's obviously theoretical, but if someone really cannot go to something like Inter, then they're not going to get that experience, and for me that's the key kind of schmooze fest, really. But that's not to say that you need to get on a plane and go anywhere to generate business. You can do it through CITMA. You can do it in London, other parts of the UK, from your computer, and the pandemic has shown us that you can generate new business and nurture clients through Zoom or phone calls or email. I think the problem comes is where you have a scenario where the woman is doing more of the childcare, more of the homeschooling, more of the cooking, cleaning, etc., which it's goes without saying it's not the way it should be. But for them then to have to sit down and think, right, now I've got to do my 4 or 5 hours chargeable work. I really don't feel like that. And you know, the end result might be sort of reduced billable hours and no appetite for business development. Completely understandable, but that amount of juggling in the current scenario, problematic. But I don't think you have to be, not everyone has to be a kind of a go-getter to succeed. There can be people who work from the office or from home and yet deliver complete client satisfaction, and other people go out and schmooze. So
Actually, that something that might be interesting is that my firm has recently, or in the last couple of years, introduced a new role of director, which is parity with partner, with a junior partner, but it doesn't have an expectation of business development. So you can't get to be a director unless you meet certain criteria, which are very, very similar to the criteria to become a partner. But there is less of an expectation of doing any business development or training or supervision. So that has been quite attractive, not just to women, I have to say, but also to men who, as Chris said, may not want to be able to get on a plane and go to a schmooze fest. So I do think that having different sorts of roles within a firm is really, really important. It's not just about the people who can spend 10 to 12 hours a day just devoting themselves to their work that should be promoted. There should be other avenues for people who are actually extremely good at their job. And I suppose one other thing I would mention at this stage is that, yes, we do have set criteria, and being a successful fee earner is, not surprisingly, number one. But it does take into account any recent absence due to maternity or parental leave or secondments or anything else like that. But then it goes on to talk about whether or not you are an independent worker. And that's a key criterion for us to be able to step up to partner. Whether you have a stable workload that you can guarantee that you'll be able to continue to handle over the next few years. Business development is mentioned. Formal supervision. Have you had experience of formal supervision? Also, importantly, what's your interaction like with support staff? As we all know, we can't do our jobs without our support staff. We're nothing without them. And if you don't treat them properly, then you're probably not eligible for partnership anywhere, I would hope. And then we also had this debate about whether or not you had to be full-time to be a partner. And I was certainly very clear when I joined the firm 2 years ago that I would not join full-time. I would only come as part-time because there are other things I do in my life and I can't do those other things as well as be a full-time partner in a firm. So I think having a set, for every firm to have this set public criteria of what people need to achieve, and in addition, on the fee earning side, what numbers you need to achieve is really important so that people can say, well, I do meet all of that. Why am I not being made a partner this year? You explain it to me. You've published the criteria, so you justify not making me up.
Yeah, I think that's
Kate.
very encouraging, Kate. Sorry, Richard. No, I was just going to say to Kate, that's really great that you actually publish that and make that information available. Because I know certainly with my other colleagues in within the industry, we always have conversations about, okay, like how do you achieve this holy grail of partnership? Because it always seems a bit secretive, like nobody really wants to say exactly how to achieve it. So I think that's really great that you make that information available to everyone, which means that everybody's starting from a place of equity. So you know what it is that you need to do and you strive towards that.
yeah, and we have
absolutely.
We have partners that aren't full-time, so there's no reason why it can't work. But I think there may also be an issue in the very, it's a structure thing again, the very structure of LLPs or partnerships is that partnership is the ultimate goal unless you create like the director role that Kate mentioned. So if everyone continues to promote and perceive partnership as the holy grail, then are we setting people up potentially to think they've failed by never getting into the partnership? And that those we have effectively a director who's a partner level, but without those commitments, because they don't want them, or they wouldn't be able to meet them. So I think those alternative career paths that have similar status without, I don't want to say binding you in a partnership, so that sounds a bit negative, but an alternative that lets people know that you've reached a certain level in the profession.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see, to hear, Kate, about that kind of clarity around the partnership criteria. I think that's probably still quite unusual, and also just about the different career paths, and obviously talking today in the context of women, but many of those things will be equally of interest to sort of male colleagues as well. So some really sort of interesting points there. Obviously, in private practice, charge out, fee earning is going to be one of the key criteria. But sort of taking us for partnership and promotion, but sort of taking a step back, there's obviously a key connection between how much you're able to charge out and the clients that you have. Is there an issue, do you think, in terms of client allocation? So where work is allocated to more junior members of staff and they build their client portfolio, is there an issue there in terms of, for example, sort of well-intentioned decisions that perhaps disadvantage possibly women more than men? So Claire has young children, I won't burden her with this demanding client, sort of thing. Do you think that that's an issue? And if so, how do we grapple with that?
I don't think I've come across that. I'm not sure that.
Good. No, I'm glad to hear it.
I don't know about the others, but yeah, I think it would be nice to think that people worked on the basis that you don't give challenging clients to people with caring responsibilities. I don't think it happens.
No, I think there might be a more kind of prosaic bit of evidence. For example, if someone is off on Wednesdays and Fridays, and there's a hearing due for a Wednesday or a Friday, then they wouldn't be able to do it. But generally, hearings can be reallocated. Most meetings can be rescheduled. So certainly, I mean, in my experience, I fling work at everyone in equal volume and wait for it to come back. So I wouldn't distinguish between recipients unless if they're on holiday. I'm not going to send them work and say do it on holiday. But I think there are potential issues there, but more likely to be, as I say, a bit more prosaic.
Yeah, and I think that if you're an employer and you're wondering whether somebody can handle workload, I mean, probably the first step is to actually ask them before you make that assumption for them. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think that is happening, or do you think that we need to make sure that it's more of a conversation?
Well, I suppose you have the process of appraisals and things like that. I mean, I know certainly I've witnessed it happen before. I mean, it's never happened to me, but I've witnessed it happen to one of my colleagues, like in the past. And then she just she quite bravely raised it in one of her appraisals, and it was corrected. But yeah, but again, it was the whole thing of you don't work on Fridays, or you're not always here, or you have to leave early to go pick up your kids. And yeah, and as a result, she wasn't then exposed to the quality of work that she should have been exposed to. But she took the step to actually ask about that, and it was rectified because it was wrong.
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
Good to hear that she was.
Sorry, Richard. I was just going to say it's just really important to empower people to raise those questions, and not just to sit in your office or sit at your desk at home and just take it. And I think that's perhaps one of the strongest messages to get out to people, is that you really do have to sometimes fight. It's not always going to come to you, unfortunately, and sometimes it's difficult. And so therefore there might be something that either firms should do more, or maybe CITMA could do, in training people in how to negotiate, or in how to have those difficult conversations. Just a thought.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think it's really good to hear, Carol, that your colleague was able to, fight her corner and stand up for what was right. But when it's you that's affected, it's difficult to do that sometimes, and particularly if you feel that it might, in raising the issue, it might disadvantage you in terms of your career progression. So there's definitely a role for sort of empowering people, but is there more that can be done in terms of colleagues helping, and particularly the kind of the role of allies? Chris, I know it's something that you're sort of passionate about in terms of male allies. What's the role that allies can play where you spot inequality, or the sort of double standards, the microaggressions that female colleagues encounter? How can we help?
Well, I think personally, you should always try to allocate work which is challenging to people that you're responsible for training, or even who are qualified, so that they get the opportunity to do work which challenges them. And if they come back and say, I'm not sure about this point, then that's good. Or if they present you something that perhaps needs some refinement, you can have a discussion about where can they get a precedent for arguments on some certain bit of law or practice. In terms of kind of challenging behaviour, personally, I would just call it out overtly and ask people, to explain their conduct, and and also if someone was being, felt like they were the victim of that kind of conduct, then come to me, or come to your line manager or the head of HR, and it will not be held against you. That kind of behaviour shouldn't go on, and it will never end well for anyone if that is allowed to perpetuate. So I think making sure people know they're not going to just get grunt work all the time, but also that your door is metaphorically always open, even if it might be physically shut, because it's far better to have an open conversation about stuff like that. But it is tricky. I take Kate's point absolutely, and appraisals are, not an evil, but they are the sort of essence of an awkward conversation, really, because you have to drill down into performance and it's, yeah. So those would be my pointers, I think. Yeah.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, I mean, and certainly sort of being in house, there's quite a lot of sort of empowerment to challenge behaviour. But obviously, in private practice, you're dealing with clients, and if the behaviour is client behaviour, then that raises its own sort of challenges. So I don't know, sort of Carol or Kate, if this is something that you've come across, and if so, how do you deal with that?
Unacceptable if it's a client or a colleague, whether it's someone above you or below you. And I constantly tell my team that if you've got a difficult client who's not treating you properly, then they need to escalate it to the head of the department or to the head of the firm, frankly, because it should be called out, as Chris said. It doesn't matter. Just because they're paying for your services doesn't mean that they can abuse you.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I liked what Chris said just now about having an open door policy. I think it's always good to know that the people that you report to, your supervising partners, that you're able to actually speak to them about issues like that, like particularly like when it's a client that's involved, because that can be quite a tricky situation. I mean, I have in the past asked to be removed from a client team because of the way a client was behaving towards me, and yeah, I mean, we had a chat with it about it with the partner, and he made it happen. Like, I didn't have to explain anything, and which I thought was just really great, and it didn't really adversely affect like any work that I then got like going forward. But it's important to have that person that you can actually go to and speak to. And I think sometimes it is a matter of actually just saying to your staff, if you have an issue, come and speak to me about it, because some people don't know. So imagine if you're somebody really quite junior, I think if you don't know that you are able to voice these concerns to somebody who is in a position of power to do something about it, it can be quite intimidating to actually approach like a partner or somebody senior about issues like that.
Yeah, so I could give a real life example of a scenario. It's from long enough ago that no one could be identified, but I had a very demanding client, and a female associate was doing the prosecution work, and this client basically reduced her to tears. But having done that, he then rang me up to tell me how useless she was. And at that point I said, look, enough is enough. We don't want to work for people who, as you say, believe that their relationship with us as a client includes the right to abuse. I mean, it's, yeah, horrendous conduct, but it shows that there are people like that who will abuse their position, anywhere really.
One thing I was going to mention, Richard, is that one of the things that we have in place in the firm is a internal mentoring system, so that every attorney, and it is only the attorneys that is hired, has someone appointed to be their mentor, who wouldn't not necessarily be their line manager, but someone that they can take issues to. And I think that's quite an important sort of development, where you have someone even from the early days of your career, and you develop that relationship with them, and hopefully they stay your mentor for as long as necessary. But it's almost better when it's not your line manager.
Yeah.
And is that something that you've had experience of, Carol? Have you been a mentor or a mentee?
Yeah, I have, yeah, both. And I mean, it's a priceless relationship, having somebody that you can, you know, bounce ideas off. And actually, I think my best mentor was somebody who wasn't even like within like the IP department, was somebody like in a different department, which, you know, just gave me like a really different perspective on things. So yeah, I think it's really great to have somebody more experienced that you can speak to about certain issues, and that can give you like yeah, perspective. It's really very important.
Yeah, I certainly have had positive experiences of mentoring, and obviously that's something that is achievable within sort of larger firms and larger in-house departments. But it's a bit trickier in smaller firms, where, you know, that there may effectively be no one to be a mentor other than your direct line manager. How can we give that kind of mentoring experience to sort of smaller firms and to solo practitioners and so on? Is that something that we can give to the broader membership?
Well, I'd just like to mention that women in IP, as part of IP Inclusive, are thinking about setting something up at the moment. So there was a webinar a couple of weeks ago, and Kate Swain was talking about this. And I think that it is something that CITMA should be supporting, because sometimes it's good to have a mentor who's not in your own firm as well, even if you're a big firm.
Absolutely, and yes, really good to hear about that initiative. And I know, Carol, that you're sort of involved in that. Is that right?
Yeah, like, so on the periphery of the Women in IP, it's kind of crosses over with the work IP Inclusive is doing with Careers and Ideas, and that is really more you know, mentoring for you know, new recruits into the profession. But I don't see why we can't kind of marry both things up, and yeah, they're definitely worth a conversation.
Yeah, I think it's
Yeah,
very,
fantastic.
very
So,
useful. Yeah, and I think CITMA could probably, you know, do something of its own accord, even if it's some kind of sort of LinkedIn style thing where someone with more experience can connect with someone with less experience, whatever their respective roles are, a kind of objective person that you could contact about whatever.
Yeah.
And that could work for paralegals as well as for attorneys.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it could
yeah,
work at any level, really, because I think it's needed at all levels.
Well, it certainly seems that there's a lot that we could do in this area, and it's good to see you know, a number of initiatives. But we're going to need to see how that we can support those and sort of bring them together for members. So so watch this space. I think that obviously that's broader than just women, but it's going to be you know, it's particularly helpful for people that are facing obstacles of any kind in their career progression to have someone who is sort of outside that that promotion structure to be able to sort of talk to and speak to about obstacles that they're facing. So we're sort of getting towards the end of the hour, and I do want to make sure that we have time for questions from the audience if there are any. So if you do have questions for the panel, please do pop them in the chat box, and we'll make sure that they get posed to the panel. So while we're waiting for any of those to come in, I just wanted to sort of touch on, we talked about sort of really egregious behaviour from clients and so on, but what about you know, sort of less extreme examples, the sort of the perhaps well-intentioned but still problematic behaviour. So in terms of the assumption that the male person is the most senior person in the room when they're not. I've certainly had that, and I have politely steered the client towards the female partner and explained that I was there to take notes, and so on. But how do we deal with those sorts of issues, the sort of ingrained assumptions, goodness, I didn't expect you to be a woman, sorts of behaviours?
I actually think that
sort of top tips?
the impact of the Me Too movement over the last couple of years has meant that most people stop and think before making rash assumptions. It feels like there has been a sea change, and it may only be superficial, but I still think it's quite helpful. We might have a long way to go before we embed that sense of, yes, a woman is just as good as a man at doing anything. But I see less of those sorts of assumptions these days, Richard. I don't know what the others think.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I think things have really changed, like in the last few years. Like, I mean, gone are the days where you'd go to a meeting with a partner and the client thinks you're there to gather coats and make tea. So I do agree with Kate that I think a lot has changed. There's been like I think a concerted effort to not make those assumptions. I used to work with a partner who was actually really very great in making it very clear, like before we actually went to a meeting, like what the roles were. So he would say to the client, I'm bringing Carol and so, and they're going to lead the meeting, and I'm just going to be there to just chime in. And that's exactly what he did. So I think, like, just making it clear in situations where people might make those assumptions. It's good to have an ally, if you want to call it that, who just makes it that you're not there to just take notes.
Yeah, I'd agree, and I think this is a benefit of being more inclusive with your client base. So if you're farming stuff to people in your team, let them take more responsibility, let them be the person who is corresponding with the client contact, and then when the meeting happens, they'll know why that person's in the room, and it's not all you or the partners pretending that they're intimate with the issue when they're just been briefed 10 minutes before the meeting. I think it's there's a more credibility, and people want to interact with the people who are actually doing the work. So I think it's nuanced, but it is rare, I think, that someone is asked to put the coats away or make the tea.
Yeah, I definitely think that there is that clarity and credibility are big issues here, and I think that the days of being able to trot out a diverse sort of group for a pitch, but then actually the work's done by others, are hopefully dying out. And yeah, the instances of the senior female person being assumed to be the secretary are hopefully dwindling. But we've had a question from the audience saying, but if that does happen, how do we deal with it?
So we're in a situation where people have not been following what Carol has been describing, where you make it very clear what people's responsibilities are. I think you can't ignore it. Again, we've said it before, you call it out, and you then just have to explain that no, the person who is sitting next to you is actually going to be leading the meeting, and that it just has to be said. I mean, I don't know whether you've been in that situation, Chris, but
I can't recall it, but you know, some clients are still incredibly, should we say, traditional, for want of a better word, and would make these kind of assumptions. But yeah, you're right. You just say, I'm the associate, or I'm the trainee. My colleague is leading this case. But yeah, it's tricky. But I think in that scenario, everyone would be really embarrassed, and so it's better to confront it and make the person who made the false assumption realize what the truth is, and then move on. So
yeah,
I think that's the way to do it.
I agree. Better to confront and dismantle early on than make the error compounded as the meeting progresses. I've got a couple of specific questions about sort of your practices. One for Kate. So the document that you mentioned in terms of career progression that your staff are able to see, is that document available to outside the firm for people to look at in terms of best practice, or is it a purely internal document?
I think I'd have to refer that to my head of HR. I mean, at the moment, it's an internal document. I mean, we do have a lot of information on our website. We do publish our gender gap, pay gap stats. We do publish all the stats about the gender balance within the partnership and in general. We have a lot of information about our diversity and inclusiveness initiatives, but the criteria is a private internal document at the moment. But maybe if I could maybe do something about it if the person wants to contact me directly.
Thanks, Kate. And yeah, you know, if there is interest in this area, maybe this is something that we need to look at as CITMA in terms of whether we can gather, you know, from your document, but also from others in terms of some best practice.
I think maybe. Do you think it may be? Sorry, I had a quick comment there, just to say there's potential for some kind of session on with people in senior roles saying how they got to where they are, saying, you know, this is what I had to do to get into partnership, and that doesn't need to be talking specific contributions, financial contributions, but overall, how does someone become a partner? What do I need to do? And that might be useful for someone who's aiming for it, but perhaps thinking, I'm not getting any guidance, or I'm not getting specific guidance on how I do that.
Yeah, good point. We've got a question from the audience about gender balance amongst paralegals and other support staff at your firms. I wonder if you could sort of briefly mention what that looks like, and if there isn't sort of diversity there, how that can be achieved, particularly taking into account that that historically perhaps some of those roles were more traditionally associated with women in terms of sort of secretaries and so on. So so what does the kind of makeup look like in your firms? Sorry.
So we have 5 paralegals across the trademark team, and they're all female. But we do have 2 paralegals in our legal team, and they're both male. And certainly as far as the paralegals for the patent side of the firm is concerned, it's still, I think, primarily female. So I'm not sure what that says.
So our trademark team, both of the paralegals are female, but on the patent side, the majority are male. So I think overall, the paralegal cohort is more male than female, but I agree it's traditionally been a female role.
Thanks, Chris. So yeah, so it's interesting, to see the sort of encouraging stats overall, but certainly not a uniform distribution of the two genders across the different roles within trademarks and the different levels of seniority. And certainly lots of sort of food for thought from the last hour in terms of what those challenges are, the structural issues, and sort of positive steps that we can take to try and sort of make sure that as time goes on, there is the equal opportunity of access between male and female trademark practitioners, so that they can sort of enjoy work and progress through their career in the way they want to. So thank you to everyone for joining, and thank you in particular to our three panelists, Kate, Carol and Chris. I certainly got a lot out the last hour. I hope everyone on the line did too. So we're up against a half hour. Sorry for the couple of questions that we didn't get to, but thanks for everyone for sending those in, and thanks again to our panelists, and we hope to see you at another CITMA webinar before too long.
Thanks, Richard.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Richard.
So that's it.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.